8:44 p.m., February 21st, 1945. British bomber pilot squadron leader James Morrison sat in the cockpit of his Lancaster, 20,000 feet above German territory. His right hand trembled on the control stick. Through the plexiglass window, he saw the burning wreckage of two other Lancasters, spiraling down to earth. Behind him in the fuselage, the radio operator screamed into the microphone. 3 words, repeated over and over: "Night fighter, night fighter." But Morrison already knew it was too late. The German night fighter hunting them had already torn 2 of their comrades from the sky in the last 4 minutes. Now, it was their turn. In exactly 19 minutes, this single German pilot would destroy 7 Lancaster bombers, 7 4-engine fortresses, each with a crew of 7 men. 49 lives, extinguished in the time it takes to smoke a cigarette. The hunter's name, Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer. The British bomber crews called him the Ghost of St. Trond. February 21st, 1945, was no ordinary day over Germany. The RAF had launched a massive offensive. Hundreds of Lancaster bombers were heading towards Worms, loaded with explosives and incendiary bombs. Their objective: to wipe the city off the map. But what the British didn't know was this: someone was waiting for them that night. Someone who had already destroyed 114 4-engine bombers. Someone who had turned the night into his weapon. Major Schnaufer was 27 years old, born on February 16, 1922, in Kau, in the region of Württemberg, Germany. He had piloted his first aircraft at the age of 18. At 20, he had shot down his first enemy. Now, at 27, he was a living legend and a walking statistic of death. 121 confirmed kills, more than any other night fighter pilot in the history of aviation. But numbers don't tell the whole story. They don't tell of moments like this, when a single man turned the sky into a burning hell. His aircraft was a Messerschmitt Bf 110 G4. Identification: unknown, but Schnaufer always flew the latest models. Twin engine, 47.5 feet long, armed with 4 20mm MG 151-20 cannons and 2 30mm Mk 108 cannons. These weapons could tear apart a 4-engine bomber in seconds. The Bf 110 was no elegant aircraft. It was a war horse, built for one task: to kill, and in Schnaufer's hands, it became the deadliest night fighter of the war. But let's go back into the cockpits of the British bombers, because that's where the real story begins. Flight Lieutenant David Thompson, 22 years old, from Manchester, sat in the mid-upper gun turret of his Lancaster. It was his 18th mission. He wore a talisman around his neck, a photo of his fiancée, Margaret. They were supposed to get married in June, 4 months from now. Thompson would never see that June. In 8 minutes, Schnaufer's 30mm cannon would strike his bomber. The right outboard engine would explode. Fuel would surge through the fuselage. Thompson would still try to jump from the burning plane. His parachute wouldn't open. Margaret would receive a telegram 3 weeks later: missing in action, presumed killed. But Thompson didn't know that yet. At this moment, 8:40 p.m., 4 minutes before Schnaufer would begin his deadly hunt, Thompson still believed he was coming home. Before we continue, something important. If you appreciate precise, documented military histories like this one, subscribe to the channel now. It costs nothing, helps enormously, and you won't miss any of these extraordinary accounts. Now back to the story. Schnaufer took off at 8:15 p.m. from St. Trond in Belgium. St. Trond was the base of IV on NJG-1, the 4th Squadron of Night Fighter Wing 1, an elite unit. Only the best night fighter pilots were stationed there. Schnaufer was their commander. His radar operator was Master Sergeant Fritz Rumpelhardt, 32 years old, from the Rhineland, married, 2 children. Rumpelhardt had already flown 98 missions with Schnaufer. He knew every move, every nuance of his pilot. There was absolute trust between the two. In night fighting, that was the difference between life and death. The Bf-110 climbed steeply into the night sky, 1,000 feet per minute. The February sky was clear, stars were twinkling, perfect conditions for hunting. The Fugi 220 Liechtenstein SN-2 radar was active. This device could locate enemy bombers at a distance of 13,000 feet. But on this night, Schnaufer would do something extraordinary. Something that even his comrades thought was impossible. He would hunt the bombers mostly visually, without radar. Only with his eyes, his instinct, and his supernatural ability to perceive movement in the dark. 8:37 p.m. Rumpelhart reported the first radar contact, bearing 270, distance 10,500 feet, altitude 20,000 feet, a Lancaster stream, at least 40 bombers in formation. Schnaufer nodded. He throttled back the engine power. The Bf-110 slowed down. Schnaufer knew, you don't hunt a bomber with raw speed. You hunt it with patience, with precision. You lie in wait. You watch. You strike. 8:40 p.m. Schnaufer had visual contact, 6,500 feet, directly ahead. Black silhouettes against the starry sky. Lancaster bombers, 4 engine fortresses, each 69 feet long, 102 feet wingspan, loaded with 4 tons of bombs. 8 303 Browning machine guns for defense. A flying fortress. But every fortress has a weakness. Schnaufer knew them all. The difference between a night fighter and a day fighter isn't just the darkness, it's the mentality. In the day, you fight against aircraft. At night, you fight against shadows, against fear, against your own senses, which can deceive you. A night fighter must love the night. He must breathe it. Schnaufer did. For 164 missions, he was no longer human when he flew. He was part of the darkness itself. He chose his first target, the last Lancaster in the formation, slightly offset to the right. A classic mistake, isolated, vulnerable. Schnaufer approached from below. The Bf-110 climbed gently, almost silently. The bomber crew had no idea. The tail gunner of the Lancaster was staring in the wrong direction. Schnaufer positioned his Bf-110 160 feet below the bomber. He could hear the 4 Merlin engines, the deep hum that vibrated the air. He saw the condensation trails streaming behind the propellers. Then he squeezed the trigger. The 4 20mm MG 151-20 cannons opened fire. Tracer bullets, yellow and red, shot upwards. Each shell carried 115 grams of high explosive. At 700 rounds per minute, that's 175 pounds of explosives pumped into a target in 60 seconds. The Lancaster had no chance. The first shots hit the right inboard engine. Metal shattered, oil sprayed. Then the fuel tank. A small explosion, then a larger one. Flames erupted from the engine housing. The Lancaster began to spin. Schnaufer continued firing. The shells tore through the fuselage, inside the bomber. Chaos reigned. Men screamed. Smoke filled the cabin. The pilot tried desperately to regain control. But a burning 4-engine fortress with a destroyed engine at 20,000 feet only has one direction. Down. 8:44 p.m. First kill confirmed. Schnaufer pulled the Bf-110 to the left, climbed 600 feet, throttled back. He breathed calmly. His pulse, 72 beats per minute, a normal resting heart rate. While he had just killed 7 men, his body remained calm. That's what made him an ace. No emotions, just precision. The other Lancasters in the formation had now realized what was happening. Flares shot into the sky, red, green, warnings. Tail gunners swung their turrets, desperately searching for the invisible enemy, but Schnaufer was already gone, almost a mile away, below them, waiting. 8:48 p.m. 4 minutes after the first kill, Schnaufer had identified his second target, another Lancaster. This time on the left edge of the formation. The crew was nervous, so you could tell by the frantic movements of the gunners. Nervousness means mistakes. Mistakes mean death. He repeated the maneuver. Approach from below, 45-degree angle. This time he targeted the wings, the weak point of any bomber, where the fuel tanks are located. His 30mm Mk-108 cannons opened fire. Each shell from this weapon weighed over half a pound, at 650 rounds per minute. A single burst could penetrate a tank. What do you think it did to the aluminum skin of a bomber? The Lancaster's left wing exploded, not metaphorically, literally. The fuel tank detonated. The blast wave tore the entire wing off. The bomber spun out of control. 3 crew members tried to jump, only one made it. The others were killed in the explosion, or crushed on impact. 8:48 p.m., second kill. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. Because what Schnaufer did next, no one had ever accomplished before. The British bombers were now in panic. The formation broke apart. Each pilot tried to escape. Some climbed, others descended. Some turned sharply left or right. Chaos. Exactly what Schnaufer wanted. In a broken formations, each bomber was an isolated target. He chose the third, 8:51 p.m., 3 minutes after the second kill. This Lancaster was trying to escape, full throttle, diving. The pilot hoped to find cover in clouds at lower altitudes, but there were no clouds, only Schnaufer, the Bf-110 Dove. 280 miles per hour, then 310. The instruments vibrated. Rumpelhart shouted warnings, too fast, too steep an angle. But Schnaufer didn't correct. He knew exactly what his aircraft could handle, and what it couldn't. He closed to 500 feet, point-blank range for aerial combat. At this distance, he could see the face of the British tail gunner. A young man, maybe 19, 20 years old, eyes wide open, terror. Schnaufer fired, the 20mm cannons hammered, the entire tail of the Lancaster shredded. The tail gunner didn't have time to scream. He simply ceased to exist. The shells traveled along the fuselage, destroying hydraulics, cables, structure. The bomber broke apart in mid-air. Pieces rained down, burning aluminum, paper, bodies. 8:51 p.m., third kill. In 7 minutes, Schnaufer had destroyed 3 4-engine fortresses. 21 men were dead, but he wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The remaining Lancaster crews radioed desperately back to base. Distress signals, mayday calls, but RAF Bomber Command could do nothing. Their fighters were too far away. The bombers were alone. With the Ghost, Schnaufer climbed back to 21,000 feet. He methodically scanned the sky, left, right, up, down, his eyes. Trained by years of night fighting, detected every movement, every anomaly in the starlight. And then, something happened that none of the survivors would ever forget. Take a breath, because what comes next reveals the true hell. The next 9 minutes would see 4 more Lancaster bombers fall from the sky. But it's not just the speed, it's how Schnaufer did it. With a coldness, a precision, that makes even war veterans shudder. 8:53 p.m. Schnaufer had found the 4th Lancaster. This one was flying lower than the others, 18,000 feet. The pilot was obviously trying to get under the radar, a desperate plan. But Schnaufer didn't need radar anymore. He was hunting now with pure sight, with instinct. He approached this time from the side, a risky maneuver. This way. The Bf-110 was exposed to the tail gunners for a short time, but Schnaufer had a reason. He wanted to hit the cockpit section. Eliminate the pilot directly. A deadly bomber is one that has no one to fly it. The distance, 1,300 feet. Schnaufer waited, 1,150 feet. His fingers rested lightly on the trigger, 1,000 feet. The British tail gunner had seen him now. His 303 Browning opened fire. Tracer rounds flew past the Bf-110, feet too low. The gunner was panicking. Panic ruins accuracy. 800 feet. Now! Schnaufer fired. The 30mm Mk-108 roared. The shells were as big as a man's thumb. They hit the left side of the Lancaster cockpit. The plexiglass exploded. Shards flew inward. The pilot, a 24-year-old from Sussex named Peter Walsh, was hit by 3 shells, 2 in the chest, 1 in the head. He died instantly. The co-pilot tried to take control, but the control column was destroyed. Cables hung out. Hydraulic fluid sprayed. The Lancaster began to descend. Slowly at first, then faster. The crew shouted jumbled commands, but without a pilot. Without controls. The bomber was just a falling piece of metal. 4 men jumped. 3 parachutes opened. 1 didn't. 8:53 p.m., 4th kill. 9 minutes since the first kill. But here's what's astonishing. Schnaufer showed no signs of fatigue, no mistakes. His focus was absolute. Rumpelhart, the radio operator, later said in a 1962 interview, Major Schnaufer was not human that night. He was a machine. Cold, efficient, deadly. I was afraid of him. Even though he was my commander. The 5th Lancaster, 8:56 p.m. This bomber had tried something clever. The pilot had turned off all the lights, complete darkness. He hoped to become invisible, but he forgot something. The 4 Merlin engines were producing contrails, white lines against the black sky. Schnaufer spotted them from 6,000 feet away. He flew parallel to the bomber, about 2,500 feet to the side, waiting, watching. The British pilot felt secure. He accelerated, trying to leave the zone. That was his mistake. Acceleration meant more fuel consumption, more heat, more contrails, even more visible. Schnaufer executed a rolling maneuver. The Bf-110 rolled 90 degrees to the right, dove, and ended up directly below the Lancaster, the classic Schräger music position. Schräger music was a special weapon some Bf-110s carried, 2 upward-firing cannons built into the fuselage. You could fly directly beneath a bomber and fire upward. The bomber had no defense against it. But Schnaufer's aircraft didn't have Schräger music. He didn't need it. His standard cannons were enough. He fired upward, a 60-degree angle. The shells hit the underside of the Lancaster, right where the bomb bays were. 4 tons of high-explosive bombs. What happens when high-explosive shells hit high-explosive bombs? Exactly what you'd expect. The explosion was so immense that Schnaufer's Bf-110 was caught in the blast wave. The aircraft was thrown down nearly 700 feet. Instruments shattered. Rumpelhart hit his head against the canopy. Blood ran down his face. But Schnaufer corrected. Rudder to the left, elevator up, engine power at 90%. The Bf-110 stabilized. Above them, the Lancaster was no more, just a cloud of fire. Debris rained down, burning wreckage, nothing bigger than a desk. The entire crew had instantly vaporized. 7 men, now just molecules in the air. 8:56 p.m., 5th kill. 12 minutes since it began. Current status. If you've watched this far, you're interested in precise military history. The channel has 16,000 hours of watch time, but only 500 subscribers. If you'd like to see more documented accounts like this regularly, subscribe now. Simple and direct. Back to the story. Rumpelhart wiped the blood from his eyes. He asked Schnaufer if they should return. The Bf-110 had sustained damage, not critical but enough to warrant caution. Schnaufer answered with a single word. 9. No. He had smelled the blood, metaphorically speaking. A predator hunter knows the feeling. When the hunt has begun, you don't stop. Not until there's no prey left, or until you yourself die. 8:59 p.m. Lancaster number 6. This bomber was flying desperate evasive maneuvers. Left, right, climb, dive. The pilot was good, experienced, maybe 30, 40 missions under his belt. He knew the night fighter's tactics, But he didn't know Schnaufer. Schnaufer didn't chase. He flew ahead. He calculated where the bomber would be. Not where it was, but where it would be. 3 seconds into the future. That's the skill of an ace. Thinking ahead. The Lancaster turned left. Schnaufer was already there, 2,000 feet away. Perfect firing position. He waited until the bomber flew exactly into his sights, like a photographer waiting for the perfect moment to press the shutter. Patience, precision. Then he fired. A short burst. 2 seconds. 80 shells. They hit the right 2 engines. Both exploded simultaneously. The Lancaster rolled uncontrollably to the right. Centrifugal force pressed the crew against the walls. 4 men tried to crawl to the escape hatch, but at 4G force, you could barely move. The bomber was spinning faster. 5G, 6G, the wings broke off, the fuselage disintegrated. Only 1 man managed to jump. The navigator. He fell 13,000 feet before his parachute opened. He landed in a German forest. Was found 3 days later by Wehrmacht soldiers, prisoner of war. But he survived. After the war, he wrote a book. The Night I Met the Ghost. He described Schnaufer as the deadliest force he had ever encountered. Not evil. Just absolutely efficient at killing. 8:59 p.m. 6th kill, 15 minutes since it began. Schnaufer now had a problem. Ammunition. The Bf-110 carried 350 rounds for the 20mm cannons and 135 rounds for the 30mm cannons. He had already fired over 600 rounds. There were no reloads. What he had was all of it. But he had enough for 1, maybe 2 more targets. He had to choose. Choose wisely. The 7th Lancaster was the last within range. The others had escaped. Too far away, too scattered. This one bomber was flying straight, constant speed, constant altitude. The pilot perhaps thought he was out of danger, or he was in shock, traumatized by what he'd seen in the last 15 minutes. Schnaufer approached from behind, classic, by the book, 2,600 feet, 2,300, 2,000. The tail gunner saw him, opened fire. The 303 Browning chattered. Tracer rounds flew towards the Bf-110. Some hit. Schnaufer heard the metal-on-metal sound. His left wing had 3 holes. Not critical, not yet. 1,600 feet. He aimed carefully. No rushed shots. He only had 40 rounds left in the 30mm cannons. Every single one had to count. 300 feet. The tail gunner continued firing, desperately. His ammunition was also running low. The last shots of a dying man. 1,000 feet. Schnaufer exhaled. Slowly. His fingers squeezed the trigger. Gently. Like a caress. The 30mm Mk108 fired 10 shells. They hit in a perfect cluster. All 10 slammed into the central fuselage, where the wings are attached to the body. The structure broke. The Lancaster literally folded in half, like a pocket knife closing. The tail section broke off. The front section plummeted, separated. 2 pieces of a once whole aircraft. No one jumped. No one survived. 9:03 p.m. 7th kill. 19 minutes since the first kill. Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer had just made history. 7 4-engine bombers in 19 minutes, 1 bomber every 2.7 minutes, 49 dead British airmen, but he wasn't done yet. Not on this day. Schnaufer returned to Saint-Trond, landed at 9:47 p.m. The ground crew immediately noticed the damage. The left wing had 17 bullet holes. The fuselage had dents from blast waves, but the plane still flew. It would fly again, and Schnaufer would hunt again. He climbed out of the cockpit. His face was expressionless and no joy, no triumph, just fatigue. The flight engineer asked how many he got. Schnaufer replied, 7. 7. The engineer thought he must have misheard. 7 in one sortie. Master Sergeant Schnaufer nodded. He walked to his quarters and wrote the mission report. 7 lines, one for each kill, time, location, aircraft type. No emotions, just facts. But the night was far from over. At 10:30 p.m. the order came. A second RAF wave was incoming. More Lancaster bombers heading for Duisburg. Schnaufer was asked if he could fly a second mission. He said yes. Another Bf-110 was prepped. His own was too damaged. He switched planes like a man changes a shirt, just a tool. By 11:15 p.m. he was airborne again, tired but focused. A predator who couldn't sleep until the hunt was done. And then, over the German Ruhr Valley, he found two more Lancasters. Alone, separated from their formation, vulnerable. 11:47 p.m., 8th kill of the day. The first Lancaster exploded after a single burst. Schnaufer had hit the fuel tank. Pure luck, or perhaps not. Perhaps with him it was never luck, only skill. 12:12 a.m., February 22nd. Technically a new day, but for Schnaufer, it was the same mission, the same rush. The 9th Lancaster tried to escape, diving, but Schnaufer's second plane was fresh, full ammo, full fuel. The bomber had no chance. 12:12 a.m., 9th kill, total for the day, 7 in 19 minutes. 2 more in the second sortie. 9 Lancaster bombers, 63 dead British airmen. Schnaufer landed at 1:35 a.m. He'd spent over 5 hours in the air, 2 missions, 9 kills. When he climbed out of the cockpit, he could barely stand. Rumpelhart had to support him. They went to the officers' mess. Schnaufer drank a glass of water, smoked a cigarette. Went to sleep. The next morning, RAF Bomber Command learned of the losses. 9 Lancasters in one night, all in the same sector, all by the same fighter. The intelligence officers knew immediately who it was. Only one name fit that level of efficiency: Schnaufer, the ghost of St. Trond. They updated his file. 121 confirmed kills, the deadliest night fighter ever. But numbers don't tell the emotional truth. They don't tell of the 63 families who received telegrams, of the fiancés who never became brides, of the children who grew up without fathers. War isn't statistics. War is tragedy, disguised as duty. You've just heard the documented story of Major Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer's deadliest day. 7 Lancasters in 19 minutes, 9 total in one night, all verified by war diaries, RAF loss lists and post-war interviews. These stories aren't easy. They aren't glorious. They're brutal, they're precise and honest, but they must be told because history isn't just the big battles, it's the individual moments when a person displayed superhuman skill. Whether for good or for bad, that's another question. The YouTube super thanks below allows me to spend weeks in archives, German Federal Archives, British Imperial War Museum documents, private collections of veterans. Every super thanks means another story brought to light, another truth that won't be forgotten. If you value this work, show it, simply and directly. But let's finish the story of Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, because what happened after that night is almost as extraordinary as the night itself. After February 21st, 1945, Schnaufer became a legend, not just in Germany, but also in England. RAF pilots spoke of him with a mixture of respect and fear. There were rumors that some bomber crews refused to fly if intelligence reported that Schnaufer was in the air. Whether that's true can't be verified. But the fear was real. Schnaufer flew until the last day of the war. His last mission was on May 7th, 1945, one day before the German surrender. He didn't shoot down a plane that day. Not because he couldn't, but because no enemy bombers were flying anymore. The war was over. His hunt was over. On May 8th, 1945, when Germany surrendered, Schnaufer had 121 confirmed kills. Of those, 114 were 4-engine bombers, Lancaster, Halifax, Stirling, B-17, B-24, the heaviest aircraft of the war, the best defended, and he had hunted them all, like a wolf hunts sheep. But here's the tragic part. Schnaufer survived the war. He was 23 years old when peace came. He'd spent his entire adult life at war, flying, hunting, killing. What does a hunter do when there's no more prey? He tried to live a normal life. He married in 1946. His wife's name was Eva. They had a daughter. Schnaufer worked in the family business, a winery in the region of Württemberg. He never flew a military aircraft again. He rarely spoke about the war. Friends said he was quiet, reserved. The shadows of the 121 men he'd killed followed him. And then, on July 13th, 1950, something ironic happened. Something that seemed like a cruel cosmic justice. Schnaufer was driving through France with his wife in a Citroën traction Avant. They were on their honeymoon, delayed because the post-war years were hard. It was a beautiful day, sunny, warm. The road was empty. Schnaufer was driving relaxed, maybe 50 miles per hour. A French truck came towards them, loaded with wine barrels. The driver was tired, had worked too long. He dozed off briefly. Just seconds. But that was enough. The truck drifted over the center line, straight towards Schnaufer's car. Schnaufer saw it, tried to swerve, but the road was narrow. He yanked the wheel to the right. The car skidded. The truck hit them sideways. The wine barrels broke loose. 200-pound oak barrels rolled over the car. The roof caved in. Eva survived, seriously injured, but she survived. Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer died the next day in the hospital, July 15th, 1950. He was 28 years old, the man who had survived 121 aerial battles, the man who had evaded hundreds of enemy bullets, the man the RAF called the Ghost, because he seemed untouchable, died in a car accident, killed by wine barrels. The British press reported on his death, not with hatred, with respect. The Times wrote, "A remarkable foe has passed. His skills were undisputed. His honor in combat was untarnished." He never rescued enemy pilots, but he also never fired on parachutists. He was a soldier, not a murderer. RAF veterans who had fought against him sent condolences telegrams to his widow. A Lancaster pilot named David Turner wrote, "Your husband hunted us like death itself, but he did his duty as we did ours. I respect him, even though I feared him." Schnaufer was buried in the cemetery in Calw, in the region of Württemberg, Germany. His hometown. No grand funeral. No military honors. Just family and a few comrades. Germany in the 1950s didn't want to be reminded of the war. The wounds were too fresh. His grave is still there today, a simple stone. Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, 1922-1950. No mention of his 121 kills, no hero worship, just a name and 2 dates. Birth and death. In between lay a life that forever changed the history of aerial warfare. To this day, the RAF studies his tactics, the way he attacked bombers from below, his patience, his ability to hunt in the dark. Military academies worldwide teach his methods, not as glorification, but as an analysis of extraordinary tactical skill. There's a museum in Saint-Trond, Belgium, where his base was located. They have a small exhibit about him. Photos, documents, a replica of his cockpit. Every year veterans come, German and British. They stand together in front of the exhibit, old men now, who were once enemies. They talk, reminisce. Some cry. A British veteran who visited the museum in 2015 said something remarkable. "I never met Schnaufer, but he killed my best friend. Tommy flew on February 21st, 1945. He didn't come back. For years I hated Schnaufer, but now I understand. He was like us, a young man following orders, doing his duty. The war was the enemy, not him. That's the ultimate truth about Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer. He was extraordinary, but he was also a product of his time. Born in the wrong era, his skills could have been used for good in peacetime, but the war took them and made them deadly. His 121 victories are a record that will probably never be broken. Not because modern pilots are less capable, but because modern air warfare is different. Missiles, not cannons, radar, not visual hunting. Schnaufer lived in the last era where air combat was still man against man, skill against skill, will against will. His legacy is complex. He was an ace, but also a bringer of death. He was a hero for Germany, but a nightmare for the RAF. He was admirable and terrifying at the same time, and maybe that's the most honest way to remember him. Not as a hero, not as a villain, but as what he was. A human being who did superhuman things in inhuman times. The families of the 121 airmen killed still carry the pain today. Their grandfathers, great-grandfathers, never came home because of men like Schnaufer. That must never be forgotten. War produces no heroes, only survivors and the dead. Schnaufer was both. To be honest, the channel needs 1,000 subscribers to keep growing. Currently, we're at 500. If you appreciate this detailed, honest historical work, then subscribe now. Every subscription brings us closer to more archival research and deeper documentaries. No glorification, just truth. What remains is the question. How should we remember such men? Schnaufer, Hartmann, Rull, all the aces, they were brilliant. They were deadly. They were on the losing side, but their skills are undeniable. Perhaps the answer is, we remember them as a warning, as proof that extraordinary skill in the hands of war produces extraordinary suffering. Schnaufer's Bf-110 no longer exists. It was scrapped after the war, like most German aircraft. But a piece of it survives, a part of the instrument panel. It's in the Deutsches Museum in Munich, behind glass, still, dead, like the man who once used it to hunt 121 enemies. Visitors walk by, some stop, read the plaque. Heinz Wolfgang Schnaufer, highest-scoring night fighter of all time. Some are impressed, others are disturbed. Both reactions are valid. History isn't clean. It's not black or white. It's grey, bloody and complicated. Schnaufer's story is all of that. And that's why it must be told. Not to glorify him, but to understand what war does to people, what war demands of people. On February 21st, 1945, in 19 minutes, a 27-year-old pilot showed what technical skill at the highest level means, and 49 men died for it. That is the truth. Uncomfortable, painful, but true. Schnaufer's last documented quote is from 1948. A journalist asked him if he was proud of his 121 kills. Schnaufer replied, "Proud? No. I did my duty. But every night I see them, the burning bombers, the falling men. I wonder if they had families, if they were happy before the war came. Proud is the wrong word. Relief that it's over is the right one." He never spoke publicly about the war again. Important. If such honest, well-researched military history is important to you, subscribe now. We need 1,000 subscribers. Currently, 500. And here's the question for the comments. Do you have relatives who flew in World War II, German or Allied? Share their stories below. Every voice counts.